Hey everyone. So I know there's a lot of talk now about food consumption, how many carbs you should have, or how much fat you should have, or all these different type of diets where you're on a low carb diet or a low fat diet or anything like that. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about low carb diets and how there could potentially be some merit to it. Based off of some of the research, and we'll see how practical that actually is, I guess, at the end of this talk. So some of the research that shows with low carb diets certainly show positive results at the end of their trial. In terms of body composition and fat loss. And essentially, even some of the studies have gone to see different tribes across the world that have diets that don't really consist much of carbohydrates. So most of their diets is essentially just fats and protein. And with a diet like that, the great thing about the body is that it will adapt. So if you are training your body to essentially function off of fats and protein, then it will survive and it will use fat as its primary source of energy, and will become more efficient at utilizing fat for energy, and then it will use its fat and you won't have as much body fat on you. So certainly that's an extreme case. These people don't have access to any carbs, so of course there's not even a cheat day or anything like that. It's fat and protein. That's their diet. On the other hand, they do have they've done some research on some elite athletes, some elite runners, and they did some experiments on them and took away their carbs for a certain period of time and found that their performance increased. And this was essentially because fat creates more energy when oxidized or when converted into energy, when it's metabolized, then you'll get more energy and you should be able to perform better. So with these elite runners, they found that they didn't need to fuel as much or take supplements as much during their runs. Sometimes long distance runners end up taking like some gel tablets or some type of sugar supplement to keep them going so they don't crash or hit that wall kind of feeling, and they need that to continue to run. But in this case, these runners didn't need that, and they continued to use their fat storage for energy and didn't really hit that wall. So they found that in these elite runners, a low carb diet was actually somewhat beneficial for them in their runs, and they ended up reducing their times. So in these examples, certainly a low carb diet has certainly resulted in benefits, when it comes to body composition and when it comes to performance, and more specifically in terms of endurance. So I guess the real question becomes whether or not this is actually a practical implementation in a average person's nutrition or diet plan. In the first example of the tribes that didn't have carbs, they have no other choice but to use fat for energy. They're not having carbs. They've trained their body to use fat for energy. So if you're looking to do that in your life and utilize fat as your primary source for fuel, then it may not necessarily be a bad thing, but the question then becomes, what happens when you start to introduce carbohydrates in your diet. And I think it's something that we should face, that we live in a world where carbs are all around us, and it is probably unlikely that we're not going to have a day where we're going to have lots of fruit, or lots of, it's going to be a birthday party and there's going to be cake there, and you're going to have some cake or some cookies. If there's 10 birthday parties and 10 celebrations that need to be done, that's 20, at the very least that'd be 20 days out of the year, and you're no longer in that no carb or low carb diet. So that would be my take on that, in terms of low carb diets and implementing that into your routine to get a change in body composition. Now, if there is a short term, maybe a month, maybe 2, maybe that's something that can be useful. If you're not already doing that, because I know some people are already on a low carb diet and still don't see results. And if that's the case, then you can't really reduce your carbohydrate content anymore, because it's already virtually at nothing. So then something else has to be explored, and probably we're going to be looking at your fat content. If you're looking at lowering your carb content for increased performance, again, these are, in this example, they were elite athletes that were elite runners. In this case, this was an extreme case for long distance, and you can use that to create more energy so that you can last longer. So if that's what you're trying to accomplish, if you're a long distance runner, then certainly that could be an avenue to go down. But I wouldn't start that if you're or explore that if we're just starting to run, for sure. But if you're a strength, if you're looking to increase strength or anything like that, you're probably not going to want to do that either, because we're not, strength training isn't long distance. It's not, you're looking at maybe, your set would be 1 minute, maybe a minute and a half. So that's not a lot of distance in terms of, or not a lot of time in terms of work. So are low carb diets good? They have some merit depending on what you're trying to accomplish. Whether it is long term or short term, maybe a different story. But low carb diets, if done correctly for a specific reason, can certainly give you some type of positive result. And if you are going to explore a low carb diet, the important question to ask is, why are you doing it, and how long are you going to do it for, and then also how you're going to wean yourself off of that diet. Because certainly if you go on a low carb diet and you start to implement carbs back into your diet, then we want to make sure that we're going to do that safely, because it'll be really easy to gain fat back. So I hope this is helpful for you, and if you have any questions, let me know.